Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Eric Australian. It's an honor for me to be here and to make these introductory remarks. It's a pleasure for me to be here at the Hammer Museum, where I have the honor of being on the board of directors. And truly, it's special because the Hammer Museum, for those of you who haven't been here before, is also part of the UCLA. And this is a special art institution in the city of Los Angeles. We have the Made in LA Biennial now, so I hope all of you who haven't been to the Hammer before have an opportunity to get connected with the museum. And for me, I know it's hard to get here at this time of day in Los Angeles, so it means a lot that you're here because we're going to be talking about a very important issue. For me personally, the Hammer is also what attracted me to this museum many years ago was the fact that the Hammer is also a cultural center. And the Billy Wilder Theater hosts incredible dialogues, which you're going to have the privilege of being part of one tonight. The university also has the Promise Institute for Human Rights, and I've had the honor of being associated with the creation of that institute, and it's in the UCLA School of Law. So the Promise Institute is also one of the sponsors for tonight's event. And I'd like to also acknowledge our special guests, Chancellor Julio Frank and Dr. Felicia Nall, who have joined us, and I'm really honored that they'll have an opportunity to also be a part of this evening because, again, we're going to be talking about something very important. And I'm probably the least knowledgeable person on this topic, but for me, when I first started learning about the existence of this problem of child marriage in the United States, I was embarrassingly uninformed. And Chelsea Clinton, one of our speakers today, educated me about a year ago. We started talking about child marriage in other countries, and we were involved in discussions around the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative and talking about these humanitarians in different parts of the world who were defending the rights of women and trying to end child marriage in other countries. And she basically told me that, did you know that child marriage is legal in X and Y states? And I was woefully uninformed. And the fact that California is one of them is one of the reasons we're here this evening. So for me, one of the things that's remarkable about this university is that UCLA has played a role in so many important developments throughout its short history. We're now in the second century. But if UCLA and if the Hammer Museum and if all of you here can also play a role in ending this problem of child marriage in California, I think we would have done something remarkable. So that's why I care about this issue, and that's why I hope you will care more about this issue once you learn a bit more about it this evening. So it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our esteemed speakers. First, I'm going to introduce all three speakers, and they'll come out, and then we'll get started with the program. But our first guest is Fraidy Reiss. She is a forced marriage survivor and the founder and executive director of Unchained at Last, a survivor-led nonprofit organization dedicated to ending forced and child marriage in the United States through direct services and systems change. Our next speaker is, there we go. Okay. Our next speaker is Chelsea Clinton. She's an advocate, an investor, a teacher, and the mother of three. As the vice chair of the Clinton Foundation, she's invested in advancing global health, increasing opportunity for girls and women, and creating economic opportunity. Chelsea also serves as a vice chair of the Clinton Health Access Initiative and uses her platform to increase awareness around issues such as vaccine hesitancy and health equity. And lastly, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Anastasia. She's an international human rights lawyer and program officer for North America at Equality Now, a worldwide human rights organization dedicated to securing the legal and systemic change needed to end discrimination against all women and girls. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Anastasia, and thank you again for your attention.
Thank you, Eric. Hi, everyone. I'm Anastasia. I'm the legal advisor for North America at Equality Now, and it's such a privilege to be here at UCLA for this timely and important conversation, and especially with Fraidy and Chelsea. with whom we are very close partners at Equality Now. So we're here tonight to talk about an issue that is mostly hidden in the U.S. And it is something that, has come to our attention more over recent years, but many times we walk into rooms and people still don't know it's a problem. So we are here to basically try to convince you all that every child has the right to be just that, a child. And so very shortly, we are going to hear from a survivor of child marriage in California. But before we do, I want to give Fraidy and Chelsea the chance to set the stage. So Fraidy, you founded Unchained at Last to help survivors and address this practice nationwide. Could you share why this issue is so personal and urgent for you?
Yes, thank you, Anna, for that question. First, I just want to start, is it okay if I just start with a few thank yous? Because could we get a round of applause for Eric? This whole event would not have been possible without him. It was his idea. His generosity made it possible. So thank you so much, Eric. And I also have to really thank the allies on the stage here. Chelsea, I hope you know how grateful I am to have such a passionate and powerful ally in this push to end child marriage in the United States. And Anna, same to you with Equality Now. I mean, both of you have been here from the beginning, working with Unchained to end child marriage across the United States. And of course, a thank you to Hammer Museum, UCLA, the Promise Institute for making this event possible, and all of you. Thank you for showing up. So to answer your question, this is very deeply personal for me. I was born into a fundamentalist religious cult. I was actually born right here in Los Angeles, but moved to the East Coast when I was very little, grew up in Brooklyn, where within this fundamentalist religious cult, I was forced at age 19 to marry a stranger who turned out to be violent. The whole thing was arranged by his family, my family, a matchmaker, very little input from me. And as a bride, I was forced to undergo a virginity exam. I had to go to a gynecological examination to confirm that I was a so-called virgin. And within my marriage, I was required to have unprotected sex with my husband, not only on my wedding night, but on a monthly basis. Basically a lifetime of rape. And these rapes were timed for when I was ovulating. And there's a very obvious reason for why it was timed that way. My first child was born 11 months after my wedding, and pretty soon I had 2 children. I love my daughters, and it's a very difficult thing for me to say, but I did not consent to having them. And I also had no financial rights. I was required to remain financially dependent on my husband. I had no legal rights. In that community, only a man is allowed to grant a divorce. So I was trapped for 15 years in my abusive forced marriage, and when I finally managed to escape, my family retaliated by shunning me. They declared me dead, and still 2 decades later consider me dead. But I rebuilt my life, and I founded Unchained at Last, the only organization in the world that is dedicated to ending forced and child marriage in the U.S. We do both direct services and systems change. And at first, we were focused on the direct services piece, and basically for adults who were escaping forced marriage, a marriage which they did not give full free consent to. But then more and more girls under age 18 started reaching out to ask for the same help, and we realized there's almost nothing we can do for them if they're not yet 18 because of their limited legal rights. And that's why, even though we're a tiny team, we decided in our spare time we would take on this little mission of no big deal, just ending child marriage in all 50 U.S. states. And thank you. And we started this national movement alongside allies like you.
No, but you have done an incredible amount of work in the past 7 years towards changing the laws. So it's really amazing. So why California in particular? Why are we here?
Yes. Why California? Okay, and I'm going to warn you, our not-so-secret mission here is to get all of you so angry, and we want you to be as angry as we are about what's happening in California. Why California is because California's laws are particularly egregious. The number of minors marrying here is particularly high, and it's particularly difficult to pass legislation here. So I want to start by asking, does anyone here know what the marriage age is in California? Just shout it out. Okay, so we have an educated audience. Usually people say 18, or if they're feeling really frisky, they say 17. Yes, so it is 0. There is no minimum marriage age in California. And here's the thing. When we first started this national movement, we had a very hard time convincing legislators to pass simple common sense legislation to ban child marriage. Making the marriage age 18, no exceptions, costs nothing. It harms no one. It ends a human rights abuse that destroys girls' lives. But it's really difficult, we found, at first, to get legislators to prioritize a girl's issues. So in state after state, we were trying and failing to pass this legislation at first. And in fact, in a moment of frustration, all of us on the Unchained team promised that when the first U.S. state finally took the drastic step of banning child marriage, we would all get tattoos to commemorate the victory. And here's my tattoo. Because in 2018, Delaware became the first U.S. state to ban child marriage. And since then, yes, applaud for Delaware. And since then, we've got a total of 16 states, 2 territories, and District of Columbia to ban child marriage, which means we have only 34 states, 3 districts, 3 territories to go. Not bad, right? We cannot make it happen in California. Almost every progressive state has banned child marriage, but not in California, because of really surprising pushback that we've gotten in California. We'll talk more soon, but again, I hope you leave here with steam coming out of your ears. This is a stupid, insolvable problem.
Thank you, Fraidy. So before we turn to Mandy, Chelsea, I'd love to know, so internationally, child marriage is recognized as a form of gender-based violence. It's a human rights violation that disproportionately impacts girls. And as Fraidy emphasized, it's happening right here in California, where there's no statutory minimum age of marriage with consent. So from your global perspective, why does this issue matter so much to you, and how does it fit into your broader mission to improve the futures of women and girls?
Well, Anastasia, thank you for being here and moderating this conversation. I also want to echo Fraidy's gratitude to my friend Eric and to my friends Julio and Felicia, to my new friends, Zoe, and everyone here at the Hammer Museum. Thank you for welcoming us so warmly. To all of my friends that I see in the audience, thank you for being with us this evening. And to the people who aren't yet my friends in the audience, thank you for being with us this evening. I, similar to Eric, feel rather sheepish and self-conscious that I didn't know about the scourge of child marriage until probably a dozen years ago, partly because we were doing a work with Girls Not Brides around the globe in kind of lockstep with our global health work to ban child marriage and also raise the age of consent in many of the countries in which we work. And someone said to me initially at the time in the context of Massachusetts, do you know that minimum effective age for marriage in Massachusetts is 12? And I said, no, that can't be true. And it was true. And then that kind of precipitated me wondering what was the minimum age in New York, where I lived, or Arkansas, where I'd grown up, or Washington, D.C., where I'd spent time, or California, where I'd gone to school. And in none of those places was it 18. And so I found my way to Fraidy, and I have just enormous respect for the woman sitting next to me for innumerable reasons. And one of them is that I think there are very few movements that we can point to and we can say this singular person really put an issue on the map, and really without whom we would not be kind of driving toward progress, at least as I define it, to be ever more protecting kind of more people's lives and livelihoods and kind of giving every child the greatest possible chance to thrive. Fraidy is an exemplar of being truly a singular individual, without whom we wouldn't be on the stage today, but we also wouldn't be able to say that we thankfully have collaboratively worked together, but really indefatigably because of her leadership, to ban child marriage in 16 states, with indeed 34 more states and 3 territories to go. And so, I just very much feel like it would be disingenuous to be working on an issue around the world and to not take ownership of that issue here at home, and to do all that we can to help protect children, and especially girls. And to me, it's not only kind of such a perverse issue for all of the reasons that kind of Fraidy outlined, but it is insane to me and absurd to me, as well as clearly immoral and unethical, that we permit children to be married, provided their parents consent on their behalf, but we don't permit them to get a divorce. And so almost regardless of however anyone else might feel about something, if we are going to kind of permit someone to do something but then not enable them to undo it, that to me should be indefensible. And I also, in general, don't believe that we give children rights, we give them protections. And so I think we have a real obligation to do all that we can to protect kids in the United States of America, whether they're living in New York or California or anywhere further north or south or in between.
Thank you. And, while we often speak about child marriage in terms of numbers and laws, there are real people behind it, as Fraidy has already attested to. But with that, we would love to welcome Mandy tonight to the stage. So give her a round of applause. Mandy Havlick is a community leader, a Rotarian, a mother, and wife to a Navy combat veteran. As a survivor of child marriage, she now champions youth empowerment, working to ensure that every person has safety, dignity, and the power to shape their own futures. And we are very honored to have you here tonight to share some words.
Thank you. Thank you, Fraidy. Thank you, Chelsea, for the opportunity to share my story. My name is Mandy Havlick, and I live in San Diego, California. I am a survivor of child marriage. I was born and raised in a Christian fundamentalist church in Tempe, Arizona. And from the age of 12 years old, I was told that it was God's will to marry an 8-year-old man who would be my future husband. While other girls were dreaming about college and their future, I was being told to marry and to submit to my husband. They called it God's plan, but I wasn't being guided. I was being groomed. By 16, I knew I didn't want that life. I told my parents I didn't want to marry him. I wanted to finish school, go to college, and build a life that was mine. But instead of protecting me, my own parents and the church clamped down even harder. They said I was being tempted by the devil. They stripped away my independence, my phone, my friends, and my freedom. So I did what no 16-year-old should ever have to do. I ran away from home. I fled to Colorado to live with my grandparents, desperate for a breath of freedom. And for a short while, I found it. But my parents persisted, and before long, I realized that this freedom wasn't going to last long. My parents called constantly, demanding that I be returned, saying I was bringing shame on my family and turning my back on God. The day after I was returned home, my mom had him back at our house. I was exhausted. I had attempted every option. I had even tried to get emancipated, to only learn that the state of Arizona did not allow that for minors as a right. And at 16, I was out of options, out of power, and out of hope. A week after my 17th birthday, I was married. Not because I was in love, not because I was ready, but because every adult around me told me I had to be. They said it was holy. They said it was love. But here's the truth. What happened to me wasn't holy. It was control. It was adults using religion to dominate a child. It was fear disguised as faith, and it was patriarchy wrapped in prayer. Inside that marriage, I lost my education, my innocence, my freedom, and my voice. And when I questioned anything, I was told I was failing God, and for years I believed it. And when I finally found the courage to leave at the age of 20, the backlash was immediate. My own church, everyone I knew, excommunicated me. Overnight, I was being called faithful to forgotten, and the same friends that prayed for me turned their backs. And when I tried to start over, my own father, in efforts to sabotage my efforts, stole my vehicle to stop me from leaving. They wanted to make sure that I couldn't escape. That's what control looks like. It doesn't end when you walk out the door. It follows you, it punishes you, and it tries to break you all over again. But I didn't let it. I found another car, another job, and a whole nother life. Leaving cost me everything, my church, my community, even my family. But what I gained was priceless, freedom. I learned that faith can exist without fear, that love is not obedience, that God, if he's good, would never demand that of a child. I now use my voice for those that are still trapped in this violence and silence, because child marriage is not culture, it's not faith. It's legalized child abuse, hiding behind the words consent and tradition. A child cannot consent to marriage, not at 16, not at 17, not ever. We need laws with no loopholes and no excuses and no exceptions. We must protect children and the systems that break that. My story is one of survival, but survival, every child deserves to grow up before being told to give up their freedom. I want to thank you, Fraidy, for giving me the space and also for your advocacy and your spirit. It wasn't until during the pandemic that I learned about Unchained at Last, and finding fellow survivors and the advocacy to work towards change has really been a very important part of my healing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was incredibly powerful, and I think it really reminds us how, so many people allowed this to happen. They didn't just say nothing, but they actively enabled it, and the work that you're doing now to, prevent this from happening to others and to help support survivors themselves is truly incredible. So thank you again.
And it takes such guts to speak up, and I know how painful it is every time to scratch off that scab and open yourself up to everyone. Thank you so much, Mandy.
And I think what Mandy's story also illuminates painfully, again, is why we need state legislators and governors to act. Because think about all of the people and institutions that were complicit in the harm that happened to her, in the effective legalizing of statutory rape, right? Wherever she got her wedding dress, wherever she got married, wherever her reception was, whomever supplied the flowers, everybody who was there, everybody who knew about the wedding, everybody who learned about the wedding afterward. It's not just of the parents or the judges that sign off in states where that is required. It's the industries as well as, yes, the cultures around what permits this to happen in the first place. And while I very much believe in the ongoing work of changing hearts and minds, I also believe in the hard legal work of changing laws and enforcing those laws so that children can be protected.
And on that note, we've seen how legal loopholes in California have allowed child marriage to occur and continue to occur. And so, Fraidy, could you explain how these loopholes work and also the risks that they create for minors?
Yeah, and Mandy's story illustrates a lot of this just perfectly. So the way it works in California is a parent and or a judge consent, and a child of any age can be married off. And the problem with having parental consent, Mandy's story shows perfectly how that doesn't protect children. When someone is forced to marry, you heard in Mandy's story, you heard in my story, when someone is forced to marry, their own parent almost always plays a crucial role in facilitating it. Parental consent is often actually parental coercion. And a judge's approval, that doesn't help either. Someone who's forced to marry, they're forced to lie to the judge. All the judicial approval process does is put the onus on a terrified child whose own parent is forcing them to marry to figure out how to communicate that to the court without facing dire repercussions when they get back home. I can tell you of every survivor we at Unchained have worked with who went in front of a judge, every single one has lied to the judge. But in terms of the impacts and the repercussions, okay, so here's where we're going to ramp up the rage. You ready for this? First of all, and again, you hear this, in Mandy's case, this is a workaround for statutory rape laws. the age to consent to sex here in California is 18. And if someone has sex with a child under 18, they can be prosecuted. Not if they first marry the child. So you rape a child once, shame on you, you're going to prison. But if you sign up to rape them again and again, congratulations, here's a marriage license. It's basically a get out of jail free card. And then it's also a workaround for human trafficking laws. The federal government doesn't set a minimum age for spousal and fiancé visas. Instead, it defers to state law, the law in the state where the couple will reside. In California, that's 0. So that means girls in California can legally be trafficked for their citizenship, taken overseas, forced to marry adult men who then get a visa, a path to citizenship, and a child bride they can rape with impunity without fear of prosecution. And men in California can legally import a child bride of any age from anywhere around the world, traffic them to the U.S. under the guise of marriage. And the U.S. Senate Homeland Security Committee report issued recently showed thousands of minors are being trafficked in this way under the guise of marriage, almost all of them girls married to adult men. And then it's a workaround also for forced marriage laws. California is one of only 10 states that actually explicitly says you cannot force someone to marry. But the United Nations recognizes all marriage before age 18 as forced marriage. Minors have limited legal rights. They therefore cannot say no to a marriage they don't want, as you heard in Mandy's case. And that means they cannot give full free consent to marriage. It's forced marriage. So forced marriage is banned in California, but a workaround for that is marry a child. And that's forced marriage, and it's legal. And then there's also the nightmarish legal trap that we're creating for minors because of their limited legal rights. If you're an adult and your family is forcing you to marry, like what happened to me, it's difficult to escape, but there are legal options. As a minor, what are you supposed to do if your parents are planning an unwanted wedding for you? If you leave home, that's a status offense in California. You can be taken into police custody for leaving home before 18 without your parents' permission.
And then you're returned to your parents who return you to your husband.
Exactly. And if you manage to get to a domestic violence shelter without being taken into police custody, they're going to turn you away. They routinely turn away unaccompanied minors. Youth shelter is not an option. You get 14 days at a youth shelter in California, and the entire time they're working to reunify you with your parents. An adult in this terrifying situation might try to retain an attorney to help them figure out their complex legal needs. Well, contracts with minors, including retainer agreements, are avoidable. Which attorney wants to take on a child as a client based on a worthless retainer agreement? And besides, minors can't even bring the legal action in their own name, so there's almost nothing they can do to protect themselves anyway. So it's what Nicholas Kristof has called a Kafkaesque legal trap. And then marriage before 18 destroys almost every aspect of an American girl's life. We're talking about her health, her education, her economic opportunities, her physical safety, her sexual and reproductive rights, which is why the U.S. State Department calls marriage before 18 a human rights abuse. And that's why this human rights abuse should not be legal in California or anywhere.
Sounds so simple when you put it like that, and it really is.
It really
is so simple. You mentioned the fact that every minor who that you have encountered that comes before a judge will lie, and I know that Unchange has been doing incredible work to document and really keep track of marriages that are happening in the U.S. because there is no central data repository. So we have, without you, we would have no knowledge of how frequently this is actually occurring. Could you talk more about the data that you've gathered and what it tells us about how widespread the issue is and how many young people it can continue to affect if we don't change?
Yeah, so that's the other scary thing is how widespread this is. It's not just laws, the old laws on the books, but it's not really happening. So across the United States, our data showed between 2000 and 2021, almost 315,000 minors were entered into marriage, some as young as 10 years old. And almost all of them were girls married to adult men, an average of 4 years older. At least 66,000 marriages occurred at an age or with a spousal age difference that should have been considered a sex crime. In California, here's the thing. In addition to having among the most egregious laws, not only in the United States, but in the world, by not setting a minimum marriage age, California is also one of only a few states in the U.S. that doesn't even bother tracking age at marriage. It's just I don't know why. I keep telling them I'll buy you a laptop and set up an Excel spreadsheet for you. Just freaking, start tracking the data. But what we do know, we have estimates based on national trends, and our estimates are that between 2000 and 2021, almost 35,000 minors were entered into marriage in California. That is based on national trends. If you use U.S. Census data shows that more than 9,000 minors each year are entered into marriage in California. And that's only those age 15 to 17. The U.S. Census doesn't track marriage before age 15. I think it never occurred to them that there would be states that allow before 18. We should introduce them to California. And then the California Department of Public Health, as of 2019, was supposed to start tracking child marriage, not in the systematic way that other states do. They were supposed to just start collecting the numbers from each county. They were supposed to start count instead of ending child marriage. They just decided they were going to start counting child marriage, but it's an unfunded mandate from the state. Counties are not complying. So the California Department of Public Health numbers are ridiculous. It shows that between 2019 and 2024, only 70 minors were married in California, which is, those are numbers lower than Vermont numbers. It makes no sense. But even if you accept the California Department of Public Health numbers, which for most counties just says NA, 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 even when you look at those numbers, though, it's terrifying. You see 15-year-olds married to men in their 30s, always a girl married to an adult man. This is a huge problem here in California.
Right, and even 70 girls, even if it was just 70 girls, is 70 girls too many.
That's 70 too many, but it's clearly not true.
No, but I think, too, Anastasia, what you imply is something that Fraidy and I have heard a lot, where, state legislatures all over the country truly, like in ostensibly red and blue states alike, will say, like, oh, that's so sad, but it only affects, like, a few people. And you're like, well, isn't it amazing that you have the power to do something to, like, help even a few people? Like, how extraordinary. I think, though, if it weren't predominantly about girls, the dynamic and the dialogue would be quite different, because the dismissiveness that we've encountered is extensive, certainly not universal, but extensive. And I think clearly particularly painful, because it is just so evident that what seems so clear and urgent to us is not always kind of shared as a kind of motivating priority for the people in power who very much truly, like, effectively the stroke of a pen could help protect thousands of girls around the United States every year.
Yeah, and it's so true. I can't help thinking that if it were thousands of boys being pulled out of school, raped, their lives destroyed, that legislators would be moving more quickly to do this.
Although there are moments of, I don't know if it's technically gallows humor. I worry there's, like, an English professor in the audience who's going to correct me, but sort of the macabre moments of truly not only once where Fraidy and I have encountered state legislatures who reference Romeo and Juliet as a reason why they continue to support not making child marriage illegal because they don't want to interfere with romance. And I'm like, well, there are lots of kids I know who want to vote, and we tell them you can vote at 18. There are lots of kids that I know who want to drive a car, and I'm like, in New York it's 17. I'm like, well, you wait till you're 17. Like, for those kids that are just wrapped up in romance, they can wait until they're 18. And also, that was written close to 500 years ago, and it doesn't have a happy ending. Like, well, why are we using that as, like, a ballast for your completely immoral position? But we've heard that more than once.
Yeah. And, I think what you're speaking to also goes to this issue of American exceptionalism that we see in the U.S. The State Department calls child marriage a human rights abuse, but only when it occurs elsewhere. They're not looking internally. And, Chelsea, you do a lot of global work, and you know that many people have historically been unaware that child marriage is occurring in the U.S. in the same way as it does abroad. But we know that not only does it exist here, but that it also affects girls in very similar ways to how it affects them around the world. And I would love for you to speak more to, what are these impacts that we see? How does child marriage impact girls in similar ways that it does all over the world?
Well, we heard kind of Fraidy list like the painful ways in which girls are generally and arguably for many almost inevitably impacted. Substantially more likely to not finish high school, right? So you can be married at 16 and you don't have to go to school any longer at 16. So you effectively kind of are ushered into a life with de minimis choices, often very much controlled and determined by your husband. Kind of the age of first pregnancy is often also before 18, before a girl's body's had the chance to mature into being a woman, to be able to carry a pregnancy in a way that is safe for her and for her future child. So we see higher rates of maternal mortality and morbidity as well as infant mortality for girls who are married and become pregnant well before anyone should be expected to do so, if we're really having a kind of public health and a patient health and a kind of fundamental human rights perspective. We certainly see that survivors of child marriage are often then more likely to be trafficked into sex work and kind of be further abused by people whom often they've returned to with the expectation that they'll be kind of finally protected, but often that is not true. As Fraidy also mentioned, because as a direct consequence of the lack of kind of formal education, often kind of much harder to kind of enter into the workforce to be able to establish kind of financial independence and kind of really being able to have some sense of kind of who you are and who you want to be, because when we ask children, like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, I think hopefully any of us would be horrified if a 5-year-old, instead of answering, like, I want to be an astronaut or a human rights lawyer or a doctor, was like, I want to be a bride at 14. But that is effectively what we're consigning with the foreclosure of kind of possibility and promise for girls. And so it really is not only a devastating set of consequences while they are still children, it is the ricocheted effect of those consequences over the course of their lives, which makes the work that Unchained does to support survivors so critically important, so that there's a greater likelihood that girls or kind of the women who were married as girls have the chance to reclaim their health, have the chance to reestablish an educational pathway, and ultimately have the chance to think about what do they want to be when they grow up, even if we force them because of our failure to protect them as children.
Right. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add, and this long list that you just gave of these dire repercussions, they're lifelong. This is something that impacts survivors for the rest of their lives. So it's, profound, the devastation that this causes.
Yep. It's profound and it's societal. It compacts and it holds women and girls back. It stops us from meeting gender equality. It stops us from, preventing non-discrimination. It, prevents the U.S. from meeting its human rights obligations. All of these, it all adds up, and it is, it's devastating. So, Fraidy, when we think about these impacts and we think about how close to home this is here in California, you've been at the forefront of this advocacy here for a number of years now, trying to get a law passed, trying to raise the minimum age to 18 with no exceptions. You formed a coalition. It's broad, it's survivor-centered. It has, all the people. You have legislative support, but you've also faced a lot of opposition. And so can you walk us through the history, how you've been working in California, the opposition that you've seen, and what has your journey been so far?
Yeah, buckle up. So, so as we're going across the United States, typically the biggest problem we have with passing this legislation to ban child marriage is it's difficult to get legislators to prioritize a girls' issue. But usually,
And again, they're like, it's just a few thousand.
right, exactly. And it's girls, they're not even old enough to vote for me. So, but when we do get pushback, so typically when these bills pass, when we finally get legislators to take time out of their busy schedule, 5 minutes to vote on this important bill that's going to save lives, when it passes, it's usually unanimous or close to unanimous with bipartisan support, no opposition, no testimony in opposition. And when we do get opposition, it tends to come from the extreme far religious right, like the fundamentalist cult where I grew up, where I was forced to marry at 19. They have a very large presence in New York and New Jersey, and they held up legislation in both of those states for several years. In California, instead, do you know who's holding up the bill? The opposition comes from, yes, we have people in the audience who already know. Planned Parenthood and ACLU, the two groups that should be at the forefront of fighting against this, and two groups whose affiliates in almost every other state support or are neutral on banning child marriage. And you're going to say, okay, but they must have a good reason, right? Okay, so you ready for some stupid? So here are the two reasons that they have given for why they are clinging to what the United Nations calls a harmful practice that's hindering gender equality and what the U.S. State Department calls a human rights abuse. One is they say, well, let's say a girl wants to marry. We're taking away a child's right to marry. But by the way, this includes 2-year-olds, their right to marry. So isn't that a lot like saying banning child rape takes away a child's right to be raped, right? Because child marriage is not a right, it's a human rights abuse. And also, all child marriage is recognized as forced marriage. These are not kids who want to marry. They cannot, by definition, consent to marriage because of their limited legal rights before the age of 18. And besides, a child has never had the right to marry in California. A parent and a judge have the right to marry them off. That child has never had that right. So this whole, let's say she wants to, make it make sense, right? And then here's the second reason, which unfortunately is going to go down in the level of intelligence. And this one is somehow banning child marriage is going to push child abuse underground. So are they saying that if a girl has abusive parents, she's better off if her parents have the right to marry her off because then the abuse is above ground? Or if a girl is in an abusive dating relationship, that she's better off marrying her abuser because then the abuse is above ground? Does this make sense to any of you? What am I missing? But because Planned Parenthood and ACLU have a lot of clout here in California, it's very difficult to pass legislation if they oppose, and we have not been able to even get a committee hearing for the legislation to ban child marriage. The only way that it's going to happen is if all of us band together. We need a groundswell. Everyone here, everyone across California has to come forward and say, hey, we stand with Planned Parenthood, but they got this one wrong. And legislators need to pass this legislation despite Planned Parenthood and ACLU's objections.
So what's your goal for next year as we look to the next legislative session?
Well, is everyone going to be with me? Yeah. All right. Okay. So the goal is to get everyone to join forces, and we can do it. That is possible. We have enough support in the legislature. If the bill got a vote, it would pass. We can't even get a vote. So if we all band together, we'll have specific ways that you can help us do that. Our goal is to finally pass this legislation. Again, there's a $0 price tag. There is no harm to anyone except pedophiles. And we can do this if we do this together.
Well, but I think we also need more people to know the real crisis that child marriage is in the states where it still is legal, and certainly here in California. I think people still really don't know. I mean, Eric and I shared sheepishly, that we didn't know about this until we did. I admittedly, often when I'm, honored to be in conversation with Fraidy, at some point will think about the fact that a man showed up heavily armed to rescue children that he believed were being held in a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., in the basement, but in a place that had no basement, had no ties to any criminal activity. And there were millions of words written about this and talked about this, where there were kind of truly not only like victimless crimes, but no crimes had been committed. But there was clearly this deep sense of kind of righteousness, from this man who showed up, at Cosmic Pizza in Washington, D.C. I don't want anyone to come heavily armed or armed at all, but I would like for us to have some righteous anger about actual children being actually trafficked into statutory rape situations, with judges and other institutions that should be protecting children not only complicit but actively cooperating. So there are a lot of smart and creative people here in Los Angeles who are really good at getting a lot of attention to lots of different issues, large and small. It would be quite wonderful if some of you thought about how to use the platforms of people that who have those platforms to try to get real attention directed to a real issue that is affecting real kids in the place and the space that you call home and that I'm lucky enough to visit.
Well said.
And like you said, Fraidy, it costs absolutely nothing. There is so much in this world that we cannot control. We cannot control all of the crises, the conflicts, the natural disasters. There are so many things going on that are not within our reach, but raising the minimum age of marriage in California, it's something we can do.
Child marriage in California is, unlike all the human rights abuses we all agree are terrible, but we might not be able to eliminate them in our lifetime because there's no simple solution. Child marriage in California is a problem we can solve by this time next year. All it takes is for us to stand strong and stand together.
So what do we need to do? How can the people here today, how can advocates, how can, people in public health, policymakers, how can we all work together to make this happen?
Well, we have a slide for that. So, yeah.
No, go for it, Fraidy.
Okay. So first of all, we have a California Coalition to End Child Marriage, and it needs to grow. Is everyone here willing to join the California Coalition to End Child Marriage? It's a very, okay, thank you. And we have monthly meetings, but you make it if you can. They're on Zoom, and if you can't make it, no one is going to look at you sideways or judge you. And we have calls to action. And if you
tell Governor Newsom. I certainly have told Governor Newsom. I know some of you know him. If you don't know him, at least write his office. Tell him that if legislation comes to his desk, we expect him to sign it.
What did he say?
Get it to his desk. That's what he says. So let's get it to his desk.
We also need him to get it to his desk.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you could.
Let's take him at his word. Let's get it to his desk.
But if you scan that QR code, there's a pre-written email that you can submit right now to Governor Newsom. Funny story. Last year or 2 years ago, Governor Newsom twice tweeted at a legislator in Missouri who voted no on the bill to ban child marriage there. He said, "What is wrong with Missouri?" Because this legislator was talking about the beauty of 12-year-olds getting married. And Governor Newsom was like, "What the fuck, Missouri?" Missouri's marriage age at the time was 16, and in California it was 0. And by the way, since then, Missouri has banned child marriage.
And they've tried to re-legalize it in Missouri, and thankfully a bipartisan coalition of state legislatures have said no. So, yes, there are people actively trying to re-legalize child marriage, but thankfully a meaningful coalition of Republicans and Democrats have stood together in Missouri and said, no, we're not going back.
So everyone scan the QR codes.
And then if you have other ideas for how you can help ban child marriage. So for example, if you have access to the first partner or key legislators, or if you have a relationship with Planned Parenthood and ACLU and might be able to talk some sense into them, please scan also that QR code and submit the contact form. Let us know. Or if you have one of those platforms that Chelsea was talking about. So if you're an influencer or a celebrity, or you have, Los Angeles, they walk among us, right? So if you have some way that you can help spread the word, because we need everyone across California. People don't know that this is a problem. We have to let them know, and then they'll join us. There's other than Planned Parenthood and ACLU, I've never met anyone in California who, once I told them this, didn't say, "Oh my God, what can I do?"
And I would say too, partners like Hammer are really important. Having more places and spaces to have conversations like this to raise awareness. I've spent a lot of time. I've been lucky to spend a lot of time with high school students. Particularly in New York, high school students were really activated, saying basically to our state legislature and governor, like, we want to be students, like, we don't want to ever have to be married, like, please don't put any of us in this situation. So think about, even if you may not have any of the kind of resources that we talked about, all of us probably know young people who really want to be able to live out their dreams, to discover their dreams, even struggle through like taking, I don't know, the geography test or the math test tomorrow instead of worrying about whether or not they might at some point be forced into marriage, or also don't want any other 15, 16, or 17-year-old to have to worry about that the same. So really thinking about how to activate high school students or college students that you may know, I think is also a really powerful lever that we saw quite effective in New York.
And finally, if you join our email list, you can stay updated. You go to unchained@last.org, join our email list. We promise we send emails only when we have something important to say, so we will not fill your inbox.
That's true. I'm on their email list. That's true.
Oh, Chelsea, you're on our email list? I love that.
Yes, I'm on your email list.
Thank you.
That's true.
We often are talking about you, so we have to be more careful about what we say. And also follow us on social media. We're at Unchained at Last on almost on every channel. And we share on Wednesdays, we share all the vomitocious excuses that legislators give for clinging to child marriage. We call it vomitocious Wednesdays. If you think Romeo and Juliet is disgusting, wait until you hear some of these other ones. So follow us on social media. And then when you get home tonight, tell 5 people about this. Let's spread the word.
Well, and if you are looking for another cause to join also with your financial resources, please do support Unchained at Last. As Fraidy said, she's a small but mighty team, and it is quite extraordinary what they've done on behalf of girls in the United States. 10 years ago, child marriage was legal everywhere. It is still painfully legal in 34 states, but we're moving in the right direction because of Fraidy and Unchained at Last, and it's just always such an extraordinary honor to share space with a truly American hero. I wish we didn't need her, but I'm very thankful that we have her.
We're very proud. I say the same to you. And speaking of which, a round of applause, please, for the Unchained team, especially Alex, who spent months coordinating this event, and Becca, wherever she is, somewhere in the audience. And we have an Unchained Board of Directors member here, also Christine Brown. So thank you, Christine.
So please take a moment to scan the QR codes. There is something for everyone. So there is something that each of you can do in this room. And I just want to say thank you so much, Fraidy and Chelsea. You were incredible. I am certainly riled up. I hope the rest of you are riled up. And
steam coming out of your ears?
Exactly.
Good.
Ready to go.